Hello interstellar everyone, welcome to class 12 biology. This video is going to be the last video of our chapter 13 organisms and populations, and in this video we'll be discussing about life history variation and population interactions. First, let us discuss about life history variation. Regarding life history variation, we have to talk about reproductive strategies, different reproductive strategies adopted by different organisms. Right, so different organisms, they have adopted different reproductive strategies due to various selection pressures available within its habitat, and those selection pressures could be from biotic factors as well as abiotic factors. Right, so because of these variations in biotic and abiotic factors and the kind of selection pressure they exert upon the organism they adopt different forms of reproductive strategies so that they can survive within that habitat. Right, so in life history variation we are going to talk about different reproductive strategies. For example, some organisms, they breed only once in a lifetime. Right, so because of various biotic and abiotic pressure, some organisms, they breed only once in a lifetime. We have examples like Pacific salmon. So we have Pacific salmon over here, and then we have bamboo. We have talked about bamboo in our reproductive chapter. In that one I told you that bamboo is the plant which flowers only once in a lifetime. And Pacific salmon, it swims upriver to breed. Right, adult salmon, when it's time for them to breed, they go upriver, and after laying eggs, after spawning, the adult salmon fish, they die. That means they breed only once in their lifetime. Right, so some organisms, they breed only once in a lifetime. That is their reproductive strategy. And some organisms, right, they breed multiple times. For example, we have birds and mammals, so like us, and we have also got different kinds of birds. Right, so some organisms, they breed multiple times in their lifetimes. So these are two different reproductive strategies. Right, how many times an organism breeds in a lifetime, that is a strategy. And we also have got some organisms who produce large number of small sized offsprings. They produce large number of offspring, sometimes hundreds, sometimes thousands, right, of offsprings. We have octopus, we have got oysters, we have got fishes which produce lots and lots of small offsprings in very large number. Right, so that is one strategy. And some organisms, they produce small number of large offsprings. Again, we have got birds and mammals. Okay, so these are reproductive strategies. But thinking about those organisms who produce large number of offsprings, right, large number of offsprings like oysters, fishes, and octopus, most of their offsprings, they do not survive, they do not reach adulthood. Most of them, they die off. Right, so they have got selective pressure, let it be abiotic or biotic, which kills off their offsprings. So in order to increase their chances of survival, what these organisms, they do is they produce offsprings in very large quantity, so that at least by chance some of them, they will survive and reach adulthood, so that they can also reproduce and their lineage will continue. Right, so these are reproductive strategies adopted by various organisms so that they can survive within the habitat, which consists of various types of selection pressure. Right, so reproductive strategies adopted by different organisms, they are result of evolution. So selection pressure leads to evolution, and selection pressure comes from various biotic and abiotic factors present within the habitat where the organism lives. Okay, so that is about the life history variation. So now let us talk about population interactions. So we already know the definition of population. So what is the definition of population? The definition of population is a group of organisms living in a particular area who share or compete for similar resources and who can potentially interbreed with each other. That is the definition of population. Right? That means a population is a group of organisms belonging to the same species. Right? But if you think, right, in nature, in an ecosystem, we do not have a single population existing within the nature in an ecosystem. Right, a single population cannot exist on its own. They need to have different organisms, populations of different species along with them, right, so that they can exist in an ecosystem, so that a system can be formed. Right, and a group of different populations is called as community. Right, so in an ecosystem we can have different communities. Okay, so since population, they cannot exist in isolation, they cannot exist independently. So the population, they have to exist with other populations, and it is bound to interact with each other. So populations are bound to interact with each other. Therefore, we have got different forms of population interactions. So what are the different types of population interactions? We have these different types of population interactions. You have to remember them all. Mutualism, competition, predation, parasitism, Commensalism, and Amensalism. Okay, so we will discuss about them one by one, right? But over here in this particular table, it gives you a general idea about what kind of interaction these are, right? Mutualism, competition, predation, parasitism, Commensalism, and Emensalism. What kind of interaction? So over here, if we look at mutualism, by looking at the symbols over here, so in the mutualism, there will be two species interacting with each other. And in mutualism, both the species, they have got positive signs over here. Both species A and species B, they have got positive signs. And what does this positive sign indicate or signify? These positive signs signifies beneficial. So these two species, when they interact with each other, so they mutually benefit each other. So both the species are benefited, right? So that is why it is called as mutualism, right? And then we have got competition. In competition, both species A and B, right, they have got negative signs. So these minus signs, they signify detrimental. So in competition, right, two species are interacting with each other, two populations are interacting with each other, and both are getting detrimental effects, right? Both are being harmed. So therefore it is called as competition. And then we have got predation. In predation, one species, they are benefited, whereas another species, it gets detrimental effect. So in predation, one organism feeds upon the other, right? So the predator, it is written positive, and the prey, it's shown in negative over here. So we will discuss about them later. Okay, so let's go to commensalism. In commensalism, one species is benefited. You can clearly see over here the species A is benefited, whereas species B in commensalism, it is neither benefited nor it is harmed. So it is neutral. So 0 signifies neutral. So by looking at this particular table, you will get a general idea what kind of interaction that is. What kind of effect does it have on the interacting species? Okay, so you have to know the name of these interactions, and you have to know the symbol signifying whether they are benefited or whether they are harmed in this type of interaction. So let us discuss about these interactions one by one. The first population interaction is predation. In this type of population interaction, one organism, it gets benefited, whereas the other organism, it gets harmed. So you can think about tiger feeding upon deer. The tiger gets benefited, whereas deer, it gets killed, it gets harmed. So that is predation. So it can be symbolized by this particular symbol, plus and a minus. And when you think about predation, you can say that predation is nature's way of transferring energy fixed by plants to higher trophic levels. So you all know about food chain, in which there are producers, they get eaten by primary consumers, they get eaten up by secondary consumers, and then secondary consumers, they get eaten up by tertiary consumers. So when you go from lower trophic level to higher trophic level, the energy is transferred to higher trophic level from the lower trophic level through predation process. So predation is nature's way of transferring energy fixed by the plants to higher trophic levels. And when you think about a predator, immediately you will think about tiger, wolves, cheetah, right? But you can also think about herbivores as predators. We can say that herbivores are predators of plants. Plants are living organisms. Since plants, they get eaten up by herbivores, so herbivores are also predators. You can give the example of sparrow eating seeds of plant. So sparrow in this particular case is the predator, and plant, it is the prey. Now predators, they are essential for ecosystem, and they are essential for the prey population itself. So how is that so? What are the roles played by the predators? So predators, they play different roles. For example, predators, they keep the prey population under control, which is very important for the stability of the ecosystem. If you do not have any tiger within the jungle, what will happen to the population of deer? It will increase tremendously, and they will eat all the vegetation, and at one point the entire ecosystem will collapse. So for a healthy ecosystem, there should be a predator. So the predator, they keep the prey population under control, and therefore it maintains the stability of the ecosystem. Another example that you can give is in 1920s in Australia, they faced the problem of invasive species, that is prickly pear cactus. Right? In all their rangelands, the cactus, they grew uncontrollably. So the people, they were not able to control the spread of this cactus plant. Right? The cactus, they were growing everywhere, since it is an invasive species. So biologists, what they realized was, by introducing a pest moth, this pest moth. So this pest moth, it harms or it feeds upon the cactus. Right? So by introducing a pest moth, they were able to control the spread of cactus. So that is an example of biocontrol. So here the pest moth is the predator of the cactus plant. So introduction of pest moth, it kept the population of cactus under control. That is one example that you should remember. And another role played by a predator is they also help in maintaining species biodiversity in the community. How do they do that? By reducing the intensity of competition among the prey species. If you remove an important predator from an ecosystem, the prey population, right, there are many prey populations which the predator can feed upon. These prey populations, they intensely compete with each other, thereby harming each other and going extinct. Right? One example was when scientists, they removed a starfish from an ecosystem, Pisaster. That starfish is called as Pisaster. When Pisaster was removed from an ecosystem, the scientists, they observed that 10 species of invertebrates on which the Pisaster feed upon, they went extinct within few years. Right? So it shows the necessity of having Pisaster within that ecosystem. The starfish was essential to maintain these 10 different species of invertebrates within the ecosystem. Right? So not just that, the predators, they are also important for maintaining a healthy prey population. So predators, they will kill off or they will feed upon weak, genetically weak prey individuals, thereby keeping the prey population healthy. Okay, so those who are weak, they will be killed off by the predators and thereby maintaining a healthy prey population. So these are the three important roles that you can mention about predators. Now, when we talk about evolution of prey-predator relationship, right? So prey and predator, they co-evolve. So this particular term will come up again later on. Co-evolve. They evolve together. So when predator tries to eat prey, the prey will develop certain forms of defense against the predator, and the predator, they will develop or evolve certain forms of characters which can overcome the defense of the prey. Okay, so co-evolution will happen between prey and predator. So evolution of defense mechanisms in prey, if we talk about in animals, they are cryptic. Some of the animals, they are cryptic in nature. They can hide or they can merge within their habitat. That is called as camouflage. Right? So why do they have to merge within the habitat? Right? For example, chameleon, if you think about chameleon, they can blend within the vegetation, green vegetation or green foliage. If you look at a grasshopper, a green grasshopper, it can merge within the green foliage. So they merge within the green foliage so as to avoid detection by the predator. So cryptically colored camouflage is a form of defense mechanism developed in prey or evolved in prey against the predator. And you can also think about poisonous animals like dart frog or distasteful butterflies like monarch butterfly. These kind of evolution, frog becoming poisonous, monarch becoming distasteful, that is a form of defense against predator. So predators like bird, they won't eat this particular monarch butterfly because it is distasteful. They become distasteful because they are caterpillars, they feed upon milkweed plant. So they store those chemicals within themselves, and when the adult comes out of the larvae or the pupae, the adults, they are distasteful, and the birds, they will avoid eating monarch butterfly. So that is their defense mechanism that they have evolved. And when we talk about defense mechanism in plants, they also have got defense mechanisms. So you can easily think about thorns, right? Thorns of acacia and cactus. They are defense mechanisms against the herbivores. right? And you can also think about secondary metabolites like alkaloids and toxic alkaloids. So plants like this Calotropis, you might have seen this flower or this plant growing in the fields in South India. In Mongol also we have got milkweed plant. So Calotropis, they produce a very toxic substance called as cardiac glycosides, which is harmful for the herbivores. So herbivores, they avoid eating this particular plant. So cardiac glycoside, which is a secondary metabolite within this plant, is a form of defense which they have developed through evolutionary means as to protect themselves against the predator, that is herbivores. So these are the examples, right? And you might be interested to research or to look into some information regarding the migration of this monarch butterfly. You may look into YouTube, you may browse in your internet and look for the information of migration of this particular beautiful butterfly called as monarch butterfly. They travel a very long distance, starting from America to North America to South America towards Mexico. Okay, so and they do that throughout the year, right? They do that when they go for migration. Since their life cycle is really short, generation after generation they will move towards the same direction, and then they will reach over there, and then later on they will move up. So here the arrow shows how they migrate. So it is interesting. You may look into this information through internet or by referring to some books. Okay. The second population interaction is competition. The competition can be best defined as a process in which the fitness or the reproductive fitness of one species is significantly lower in the presence of another species. So in this particular case, these two species, their reproductive fitness, they get lowered in the presence of each other. Why does it happen? It happens because these two species, they are competing for the same resources. Since they are competing for the same resources, their reproductive fitness, it gets affected. Okay, so that is the effect of competition, and that is the definition of competition. Now the competition is of two types, interspecific competition and intraspecific competition. Interspecific competition means competition between two different species. You can think about competition between tiger and leopard, right? Tigers and leopards, they are both predators, so they are competing for the same herbivore population. So that is interspecific competition. Whereas intraspecific competition is the competition between individuals of the same species. You can think about two leopards competing with each other for same resources. Okay, so intraspecific competition and interspecific competition. We will be talking about interspecific competition. What can be the effect of interspecific competition? There is one thing that is possible. There is one thing which can happen. If the competition between the two species is uneven, if one is stronger than the other, the stronger competitor will exclude or kick out or eliminate the weaker competitor. That is called as Gauss's competitive exclusion principle. So since this particular principle was proposed by Gregory Gauss, it is called as Gauss's competitive exclusion principle. So here the philosophy followed is adapt or die. One example that you can give is Galapagos Abingdon tortoise versus goat. On the Galapagos Island, there was the native species Galapagos Abingdon tortoise, and the sailors, they introduced goat. Now goat and Abingdon tortoise, they are both grazers. They feed upon vegetation. And goat, they are superior competitor than Abingdon tortoise, because Abingdon tortoise, they were slow grazers, whereas goat, they are voracious. Right? They graze quickly. They reach each and every part of the island in a very short span of time. So what happened after a few years, the Galapagos Abingdon tortoise, they went extinct from that island, because the goat, they were superior, they were stronger competitor, and Abingdon tortoise, they were weaker competitor. So this is an example of competitive exclusion. But there are many ecologists who does not agree with Gauss, who does not agree with competitive exclusion principle. It is not necessary in a competition for the stronger competitor to eliminate the weaker competitor. Sometimes competition can lead to coexistence of these two competing species. Even though one is stronger than the other, they can coexist. How do they do that? They do that by resource partitioning. You can give the example of 5 species of warbler birds living on a single tree. Here the tree is the resource. 5 different species of warbler birds, they are competing for this particular resource. So how did they manage? Right? They managed this particular competition by using different parts of the tree. These 5 different warbler species, they resource partitioned. They partitioned the resource into different zones in which these warbler species, they existed. So there is a coexistence among the competing species. Right? So these are the 2 outcomes. Either competition can result in exclusion, or competition can lead to coexistence. Okay? So that is about competition. The third type of population interaction is parasitism. In parasitism, there is one organism, which is the parasite, living upon or inside another organism, that is the host. And in this particular process, the parasite is benefited, whereas the host is harmed. And the parasite, it reduces the survival, growth, and reproduction of the host. Thereby, it harms the host. So we have got this plus and negative sign over here. Okay, so parasites, they have evolved to be host specific, which means a specific parasite, it infects or it lives upon or it lives inside a particular host species. So they have evolved to be host specific, and therefore there is co-evolution of host and parasite. Just like in predation, we also have got co-evolution between host and parasite. I told you that there is a co-evolution between predator and prey in predation. Here also we have got co-evolution between host and parasite. Host, they develop different forms of defense mechanisms against parasite, whereas parasite, they evolve different morphological structures, physiological structures, right, changes within itself, so that they can live on or within the host organism. And some of the parasites, they have got very complicated life cycles. Right? We have studied about the life cycles of Plasmodium. So Plasmodium is a parasite, and in that particular case, a Plasmodium, it has got one vector, one intermediate vector, that is mosquitoes. And some parasites like liver fluke, Phaeacula hepatica, they have got 2 intermediate vectors. Fish and snail, they have got 2 intermediate vectors, they are fish and snail, whereas Plasmodium, they have got only one intermediate vector, that is the mosquito. Okay, so they have got complicated life cycle. And parasites, they can be either ectoparasites, right, if they are living on the outer surface of the host, like lice in our hair, right, and ticks on the body of our pet animals like dogs and cats, or Cuscuta. Cuscuta is amarbil, right, which is a ectoparasite. It's plant parasite. It's a plant which lives on other plant, and it's a parasite. Okay. And another form of parasite is endoparasite, parasites which live within the host organism. So we have example Plasmodium. So since Plasmodium, it lives within us, so it is an endoparasite. Whereas lice and ticks, they live on the body of the animal, so they are ectoparasite. Ecto means outside, whereas endo means inside. Another interesting example of parasitism is brood parasitism in birds. So here we have the example of cuckoo bird. One interesting fact is that a mother cuckoo bird, she never builds her own nest. She lays her eggs in the nest of other bird. You might have heard about this particular example in some movies, right? So a mother cuckoo bird, she lays her eggs in the nest of other bird. So the other bird, when cuckoo chick hatches out, the other bird will raise the chick as her own. Now, how is it parasitism? It is parasitism because as soon as the cuckoo chick hatches out, it kicks out the chicks of the other bird, right? And it can also kick out the eggs of the other bird. Now, the other bird, or this bird, she spends all her energy in raising up this particular chick, which is not her own. So this is a form of parasitism because here she doesn't get any benefit. Her genes, it does not get propagated. Her chicks didn't survive. So it's a form of brood parasitism, or it is a form of parasitism. So that is about parasitism. Another type of population interaction is commensalism. In commensalism, one organism gets benefited, whereas the other species or this other organism remains unaffected. So we have a plus and a neutral sign over here to represent commensalism. For commensalism, you have to remember some examples that are given in your textbook. So the first example is orchid plants growing on mango tree. So here the orchid plant, it gets benefited, whereas the mango tree, it remains unaffected. Okay, in animal world we have barnacles, which are small arthropods which grows on whale. So barnacles growing on whale is a form of commensalism. Here the barnacles get benefited, whereas the whale remains unaffected. So whale is a huge animal, so it can move from place to place, whereas barnacles, they are small and they cannot move on their own. So by growing on the surface of the whale, they can move around from place to place. Now these barnacles, if they grow on smaller animals like on the shell of turtles, they can harm the movement of the turtle. Right? So that is not a form of commensalism. But here, since whales are huge, barnacles, a few barnacles growing on the surface of the whale, it does not affect the whale. So it is a form of commensalism. And another common example is cattle egrets and browsing cattle. So egret is a small bird like this one. You might have seen in the fields in India. Right? They walk along with cattle. So here the cattle is unaffected, whereas the egret, it gets benefited. How do they get benefited? While the cattle, they move through the dense grass or thick foliage, they disturb the insects hiding in the foliage. And they can easily, these birds, they can easily catch those insects, right, with the help of the cattle. So here the egret is benefited, the cattle is unaffected. So this is one example. One more example is clownfish and sea anemone. So sea anemone, they have got stinging tentacles. These sea anemone, they have got stinging tentacles, poisonous tentacles, but the clownfish, they can live within these sea anemone without getting stung. They have the ability to live within the sea anemone without getting stung. Now these clownfish, they get protection from their predators with the help of sea anemone, but the sea anemone, it does not get any benefit, right? But it does not get harmed as well, so it is unaffected. Sea anemone is unaffected, whereas the clownfish, it gets protection from the predators, which gets scared to attack them in sea anemone because the sea anemone can sting them. So these are the examples of commensalism. The fifth type of population interaction is mutualism. In mutualism, both the interacting species, they get benefited. So therefore, we have got two positive signs over here. We have to remember some examples in mutualism, that is lichens. Lichens are formed by symbiotic association between fungus and algae. And then we have got mycorrhizae. Mycorrhizae is also formed by symbiotic association between fungi and plant roots. And in pollination and seed dispersal, we can see a mutual relationship between plants and animals. Plants, they get service from the animals, like for pollination and for seed dispersion. Animals, they get fruit and they get pollen and nectar. So that is a mutual relationship. Whereas the plants, wherein they are providing some kind of reward for the animals. Apart from providing reward, there is some kind of deceit which the plant carries out. There is an example over here. Orchid plant, especially Ophrys, right? They have got modified petals, and their modified petals, they look like a female bee. So bee is the pollinator for orchid plants. So in order to attract that bee, right? So orchid plants or Ophrys, they have modified their petals into looking like a female bee. So it's a form of sexual deceit. It attracts the male honeybee, right? And the male honeybee, it comes over here and tries to mate with it, like a pseudo copulation, right? And while doing that act, it carries the pollen grain, and when it goes to other flower and tries to pseudo copulate over there, right, it deposits the pollen grain. So it helps in the pollination process. So it's like it's like calling accurate pollinator towards the plant. So it's a form of sexual deceit. Here there is no reward, right? Again, another example is given, specificity of pollination, right? Some form of mutual relationship is obligatory, right? Why it has become obligatory is because there is reliance of a plant upon only a specific type of pollinator. For example, fig tree depending upon its wasp. So the relationship between fig tree and the pollinating wasp is obligatory, means they have to depend upon each other. Right? Without one, the other cannot survive. So it is obligatory relationship. It is an obligatory form of mutualism. Right? The fig tree, it provides a nursery within its fruit for the wasp brood, whereas the wasp, it helps the fig tree in pollination. There is no other insect which can pollinate the fig flower. So it's a specificity of pollination. In this picture, you can see the relationship between the mutual relationship between the fig tree and wasp. So in the figure number A, the fig flower is pollinated by the wasp, whereas the wasp, it lays its egg in the fig fruit, where the larvae will feed upon the fig seeds. Okay, so it's a mutual kind of relationship. So that is about mutualism. And finally, we have the sixth type of population interaction, that is Amensalism. In Emensalism, one interacting organism is inhibited or harmed, whereas the other organism remains unaffected. So we have got a negative sign and a neutral sign. This particular type of interaction is not given in your textbook, but I thought it will be interesting for you to know. Right? So you can give some examples like penicillium and bacteria. The relationship between penicillium and bacteria is such that when penicillium grows in a culture, around the penicillium, the bacterial growth is inhibited. So the bacteria, it is harmed, whereas penicillium, it remains unaffected. Okay, so it happens because the penicillium bacteria, it releases penicillin, which is a form of antibiotic which can kill bacteria. So the bacteria, bacterial colony, they cannot grow near the colony of penicillium. So penicillium is a fungus. Okay, so penicillium, it releases antibiotic, penicillin, and thereby inhibits the growth of bacteria. So it's a form of amensalism between the two. And we also have the example of large trees, which inhibits the growth of small herbaceous plants nearby its root. Right? So that is also a form of amensalism. Large trees, it remains unaffected, whereas the small herbaceous plants, their growth is inhibited. Okay, so with this, we have come to the end of the chapter. Next, we will discuss about chapter number 15, biodiversity and conservation. So please read about biodiversity and conservation before you watch the next video. Thank you.